My name is Grace, and I still remember the way Tyler's face twisted when I said the words, I already sold it. That $3.5 million penthouse he thought was his forever gift, paid for by me, was no longer his. He rattled the door, screaming, "What the hell?" in his designer tuxedo, while I stood in the shadow of the porch, holding the power he had always taken for granted. I looked at the red air light on the keypad and whispered, "You do not need to break the glass, Tyler. It is over. Welcome to When Karma Strikes." Sitting here in my garden, watching the fish, I'm reminded that a calm surface often hides sudden shifts. Where are you tuning in from today? Do you have a favorite peaceful spot or a garden of your own? I love reading about your world. But for Grace, the surface was about to break with a single, sharp ping. The betrayal did not come with a scream. It came with a ping. It was 11 o'clock on the night before the wedding, the kind of hour where the world is supposed to be quiet. I was sitting in my office in San Francisco, the city lights blurred by the fog outside my window, finishing a strategy report for a new artificial intelligence firm. My phone glowed on the desk, a single text message from my mother, Monica. I picked it up, expecting a last-minute detail about the rehearsal dinner or a request for a ride. Instead, the words on the screen were clinical, sharp, and meant to draw blood. It said, "Grace, we have all discussed it. Your presence at the ceremony tomorrow would ruin the aesthetic of Tyler's high society event. We told Jasmine's family we come from old money, and your self-made struggle reminds everyone of the truth we left behind. Please stay home." I did not cry. I did not call her to beg for an explanation. In my line of work, we do not react to bugs in the system, we patch them. I stared at the message until the blue light burned into my retinas, and I realized a truth I had been trying to outrun for 32 years. I was not a daughter or a sister to them. I was a silent investor in their version of a happy family, a subscription service they used whenever the bill was too high for them to pay. I reached for the leather-bound folder on the corner of my desk. Inside was the closing deed for a luxury penthouse overlooking the bay, the property I had spent $3.5 million on as a wedding gift for Tyler. It was supposed to be my final attempt to buy a seat at their table, a peace offering to parents who always saw me as less. I looked at the unsigned signature line at the bottom of the transfer document. Because of Tyler's characteristic laziness and his arrogance in assuming I would never withdraw my support, he had not bothered to sign the final paperwork I had sent weeks ago. Legally, the property was still mine. Every brick, every window, every inch of marble belonged to me. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a single ounce of regret, but there was only clarity. This was not a family crisis. It was a balance sheet, and they had just gone into a moral deficit they could never repay. My compassion had been a luxury. They had overdrafted for years. At 11:07 p.m., I dialed my real estate agent's personal number. She answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. I told her to activate the emergency sale clause for the penthouse. The buyer who put in the backup cash offer last week, tell them it is theirs. The all-cash buyer had already cleared the title search and signed the contingency-free agreement last Friday. All that was left was for me to trigger the final release of funds from escrow. I wanted the locks changed and the funds transferred. By tomorrow morning, I was closing the account. I sat in the silence of my San Francisco office, the hum of the server rack sounding like a low, rhythmic growl. Suddenly, I was not a 32-year-old consultant at the top of my field. I was 12 years old again, standing in a kitchen in Atlanta that smelled like old grease, humid air, and quiet disappointment. The screen door was whining on its hinges, a sound that had become the soundtrack to my childhood. My father, Gary, was sitting at the table, checking the scores in the newspaper. Tyler was leaned back in his chair, already acting like the king of a castle he had not built. I remember the exact moment Gary reached into his wallet. He pulled out a crisp $50 bill and slid it across the linoleum toward Tyler. "Here," he had said, his voice warm in a way it never was when he spoke to me. "Take this. Go see a movie with your friends. You have been working hard at practice." Tyler had not been working hard. He had been barely passing his classes and spending most of his time making me do his chores. But Gary did not see that. He saw the son he wanted to see. I stepped forward then, my heart thumping against my ribs. I had been holding a list for 3 days, waiting for the right moment to ask. "Dad?" I had whispered. "I need $38 for my new science and history textbooks. The school said I cannot stay in the advanced track if I do not have them by Monday." The warmth evaporated from Gary's face instantly. He did not even look at the list. "Textbooks?" he snapped. "Grace, you are always asking for something. Do you think I am made of money? You need to learn to be more like your brother. He does not nag me for every little thing." I stood there, looking at the $50 bill Tyler was already pocketing. Tyler gave me a smirk, the kind that said he knew exactly what was happening, and he enjoyed it. That was the trap of our family, the trap of normalized cruelty. In our house, Tyler's wants were treated as urgent necessities, while my fundamental needs were treated as a personal attack on the family budget. This is a psychological mechanism that toxic families use to maintain a hierarchy. They decide, without ever saying it aloud, that one child is the investment and the other is just a resource to be used when convenient. By making the cruelty feel normal, they ensured that I would keep trying to earn the love they were never going to give. Gary did not see himself as a bad father that day. He saw himself as a man teaching his daughter responsibility while rewarding his son's potential. But all he really taught me was that my value was 0 in his eyes. I was the spare part, the girl who was expected to be smart enough to navigate the world alone, but quiet enough never to complain about the lack of a map. I walked out of that kitchen without the money for my books. I did not cry, because I knew that in this house, tears were just another form of drama they would use to disqualify me. I realized then that if I wanted a seat at any table, I was going to have to build the table myself. After that day in the kitchen, I never asked Gary for another cent. Instead, I found a job at a classic American diner on the outskirts of town. I spent my high school nights behind a counter that smelled of stale grease and industrial-grade floor cleaner. My hands were constantly reddened and blistered from the steam of the industrial dishwasher and the heat of the fryers. While Tyler was out spending the $50 bills, Gary handed him like candy. I was counting nickels and dimes. To save for a college tuition fund that my parents had made clear was entirely my responsibility. This is what I have come to call the survivor's invisible chain. When you grow up as the spare part in a family, you develop a hyperfixation on self-sufficiency. You do not just work to live. You work to prove you have a right to take up space. People see my success now and call it ambition, but it was born from a much darker place. It was a prison without bars, a psychological state where I believed that if I could just build a high enough ladder, I could finally reach a place where I was visible to the people who were supposed to love me. I was the diner strategist, calculating my exit, one double shift at a time. I eventually made it to San Francisco, rising through the ranks to become one of the top artificial intelligence strategy consultants in the city. My salary hit 6 figures before I was 25, but the invisible chain still had its hooks in me. That is why I bought that penthouse. $3.5 million of prime real estate was not just an act of generosity. It was my final, desperate attempt to buy a seat at a table that was never set for me. I wanted to be the one who saved Tyler, the one who finally made Gary and Monica look at me with something other than irritation. I thought that by handing them a multi-million-dollar key, I could rewrite 22 years of being second best. I was an expert at predicting systems and algorithms, but I had failed to account for one simple variable. You cannot buy a soul that was never for sale. The penthouse was the highest rung on my ladder, but when I reached the top, they did not offer me a hand up. They just kicked the ladder away and told me to stay home from the wedding because my presence would ruin the aesthetic of their new high society life. That was the moment the chain finally snapped. I was not an investment to them. I was just a source of revenue that had outlived its usefulness. The day before the wedding, I did not spend my time checking the guest list or picking out jewelry for a ceremony I was banned from attending. I was monitoring the market. Specifically, I was monitoring Tyler's digital footprint. He had posted a carousel of photos on social media, the high-definition kind that professional stagers use to sell a dream. In the center was the $3.5 million view from the penthouse terrace, with him and Jasmine clinking glasses of champagne. The caption was a masterpiece of narcissistic fiction, finally moving into our forever home. A self-made achievement. Hard work pays off. I looked at the screen and felt a cold, clinical amusement. It was like watching a simulation based on corrupted data. He had spent 3 decades letting me pay for his mistakes, yet here he was, branding my capital as his character. I sat in Julia's office 2 days after the midnight text, the scent of expensive toner and high-altitude silence pressing against my eardrums. Julia had been my friend since our freshman year, and now she was a family law attorney with a reputation for being clinical and lethal. She simply slid a thick, gray folder across her mahogany desk and said, "Grace, we were looking for leverage in case Tyler tried to contest the penthouse sale, but I found the kill shot." I opened the folder, my fingers steady as I flipped through the pages of digital forensics and banking records. Julia pointed to a document from 3 years ago, a property deed for the 10-acre plot of land in Georgia that my grandmother had left specifically to me in her will. That land was the only part of my heritage I actually valued. It was a place with ancient oak trees and a small pond where I used to hide from Tyler's bullying and our parents' indifference. But as I stared at the deed, I realized the land was no longer mine. It had been sold 36 months ago to a residential developer for $180,000. I looked at the signature line at the bottom. The name Grace Henderson was written in a frantic, upward-sloping scrawl. It was a perfect imitation of my handwriting, but the pressure on the pen was all wrong. It was the penmanship of someone who had never learned to wait for what he wanted. Someone who felt entitled to whatever he could reach. "He forged your identity, Grace," Julia said. "He used a dormant bank account you had not checked in years to funnel the money out." The entire $180,000 was spent at a high-stakes casino in Las Vegas within 48 hours of the sale. I leaned back in the chair and felt a sudden, cold release. I did not feel a breakdown. I felt a binary clarity. This was the lethal discovery that removed every remaining thread of my obligation to the Henderson name. Tyler had not just been ungrateful, he was a predator in a designer suit. He had cashed in on my memories, while our parents, Gary and Monica, toasted his potential. I realized then that my parents likely knew. They had always covered for his mistakes, calling them growing pains, while calling my successes distractions. I told Julia to file the criminal complaint. I wanted the forgery evidence included in the final legal notice we were taking to the penthouse tonight. I wanted the truth to be the only thing waiting for them when they arrived after the ceremony. Inside, I did not feel the need for an apology. An apology is a social construct, a police report is a fact. The sky was the color of old bruises, deep purple with streaks of fading gold, when I returned to the porch of the penthouse. The building stood quiet, a hollowed-out monument to a dream that was never truly theirs. Tyler tried the code first, a sharp beep, then the flat, red error tone. He tried again, his movements becoming frantic. He jiggled the handle, then gave it a solid shoulder shove, as if force could fix a legal reality. That was when I stood up. Slowly, deliberately, my shoes made a soft thud against the wood as I stepped into the spill of the streetlights. Tyler's jaw slackened. "Grace? What the hell are you doing here? And why won't the door open?" I told him simply, "I already sold it." The escrow was finalized on Friday, and the wire transfer hit my account an hour ago. The new owners take possession on Monday. Tyler stared at me like I had spoken a dead language. Sold it? You can't sell our house. This is our wedding gift. Beside him, Jasmine looked between us, her brow furrowed in confusion. Tyler, you said she refused to come to the wedding because she was jealous. You said the deed was already in your name. I stayed silent, letting the tension fall into her lap. Tyler shifted, his face turning an ugly shade of red. He began to scream about loyalty and family, but as I watched him, I realized he was suffering from the illusion of power that comes from an empty wallet. Because Gary and Monica had treated my capital as his character for 30 years, he had built his entire identity on assets he never earned. He mistook my generosity for his authority. Now that I had pulled the plug, his high society status was evaporating. He was just a man in an expensive suit. He could not afford to dry clean. You want to talk about family, Tyler? I asked. Let's talk about the $180,000 you stole from me by forging my signature to sell our grandmother's land in Georgia. The silence that followed was lethal. Tyler looked at the envelope like it was a live grenade. Jasmine reached down and picked it up before he could. She scanned the digital forensics report, her eyes widening as she saw the bank records and the trace. She looked at the man she had just married and saw a stranger. You're a thief, she whispered, her voice cracking like glass under pressure. You told me your little sister was the drama, but you're the criminal. You built our life on a lie you stole from her. Tyler scoffed, trying one last desperate manipulation. Baby, I was protecting you. I was going to pay her back once the business took off. The business you have not worked at in 6 months? I added. Jasmine did not wait for another lie. She reached up, twisted the engagement ring off her finger, the one Tyler had likely bought with the money from my stolen land, and dropped it onto the porch floor. It made a small, metallic ping as it rolled toward my feet. She did not look at Tyler again. She just turned and walked toward the elevator, her white dress trailing through the dust of a home that was never hers. Tyler did not follow her. He sank onto the top step, his head in his hands, his carefully constructed world finally matching his bank account. 0. I stood over him, holding the power he had always taken for granted, and I did not feel a single flicker of pity. Goodbye, Tyler, I said, stepping past him toward my car. I hope the aesthetic was worth the cost. The $3.5 million arrived in my account on a Tuesday afternoon, a series of digits on a screen that represented the absolute end of my life as a Henderson asset. For 32 years, I had been the silent investor in my parents' and brother's vanity. But as I watched that balance update, I felt the final thread of the invisible chain snap for good. The fallout from the porch verdict was swift and clinical. Tyler was charged with felony identity theft and grand larceny. He did not have a multi-million-dollar penthouse to hide in anymore, and he certainly did not have Jasmine. She had contacted her lawyers to initiate an annulment filing before the weekend was even over, realizing that she had not married a successful entrepreneur, but a man who built his throne out of stolen memories. Gary and Monica did not escape the liquidation either. The San Francisco social circles they had worked so hard to penetrate closed their doors once the police reports became public. They tried to call me 16 times in 3 days, their messages shifting from demands for loyalty to desperate pleas for a family loan. I did not answer a single one. I used the $3.5 million to establish the Legacy Foundation, a scholarship and support fund for students who, like the 16-year-old me, are working double shifts at diners and hiding their dreams because they were told they were a resource rather than a future. A month after the sale, I sat down with Jasmine in a small cafe near the waterfront. She told me she had gone back to school for her master's degree, funded by the $50,000 wedding gift my business partner had given her, which she had reclaimed as a starting over fund. We clinked our coffee mugs, not to family blood, but to chosen kinship, the people who actually see you when the lights are off and there are no cameras to perform for. I have come to realize that the most dangerous prison is the one without bars, the one where we wait for permission, from people who will never give it to us. I spent decades trying to buy a seat at a table that was never meant for me, only to find that the only seat that mattered was the one I built for myself. If you find yourself in a similar situation, if you are the one sitting at the edge of the room, feeling like the spare part in your own family machine, I want you to listen to me. Reclaiming your worth is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of survival. You are not a phase, and you are not a burden. You do not owe your life to people who only view you as a resource to be overdrafted. Forgiveness is often spoken of as a gift to the other person, but sometimes the most healing thing you can do is to forgive yourself for ever believing their version of you. Setting a boundary is not about building a wall. It is about defining where you end and their dysfunction begins. You have the right to take up space. You have the right to be luminous without needing anyone else's approval to shine. My table is now filled with people who chose to be there not because of blood, but because of mutual respect and shared truths. I realize that the best revenge is not the destruction of those who hurt you. It is building a life so bright and so full of purpose that their early dismissal of you becomes completely irrelevant. I told the truth, I closed the door, and for the first time in my life, I am finally home. The best revenge is living a brilliant life without ever needing them again. If you need more strength to start your own journey of reclaiming your worth, please hit like and follow me. You are not alone.